Welcome back. We are now joined by Avi Maya, editor-in-chief at the Jerusalem Post. Avi, thank you so much for joining us. Let me straight away ask you about Israel's order to Gaza civilians to leave as soon as possible. 1.1 million civilians have been ordered to leave within 24 hours. Is there likely to be an extension considering the global pressure? And what happens after 24 hours?
I think it's important to start with the cause and not the effect. We're talking about the most devastating act of violence in Israel's history. 1,400 people who have been murdered in cold blood, including infants, babies, young men and women, children, the elderly who were executed in the street, people who were burned alive. This is a country in mourning and it's a country in trauma. What Israel is trying to do right now is twofold. First of all, it is trying to return its hostages home. There are elderly men and women, whole families, small children who are being held by Hamas in contravention of international law and any standard of decency in Gaza. The first goal is to bring them home. The second goal is to deal Hamas a blow that it will never, ever recover from. We have to understand Hamas is an ISIS-like organization. It is an organization that is insatiable in its desire to see the murder of Jews. You know, your previous guest, I think, had it right in saying that Hamas wants Israel to be wiped off the map. It says so very explicitly. But it also wants to murder every single Jew in the world. It says that explicitly as well. That is in its founding charter. It says if there is a rock or a tree, someday it will reach out and say, there's a Jew behind me, come kill it. That is what it is set out to do. And so Israel's responsibility to its citizens is to do whatever it can to prevent that from happening. And that is what is happening in Gaza today.
Right. Those are very important views, Avi. I'd also like to understand from you, personally, for you and your colleagues at the Jerusalem Post, how difficult have the last few days been? Have there been personal tragedies that some of your colleagues have gone through? As an editor, as a journalist, is this the most difficult moment for you as well?
There has not been a more difficult moment for the people of Israel since its establishment 75 years ago. There's not a single home in Israel that has not been affected in some way, not a single person in Israel who doesn't know someone who's been affected in some way, who's lost a family member, a loved one, a friend. I know several people who have been murdered on Saturday. Several of my staff members also have family members and friends who have been killed. Several of my staff members have been mobilized, have been called up for reserves, or have their children. This is a country in mourning, a country in tremendous, tremendous trauma, but a country also that is marked by tremendous resolve to do whatever it can to overcome this extremely dark moment and move ahead towards a more positive and hopeful future.
Right. It's heartening to hear that as well. I would like to ask you about the situation of hostages. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, came with the in charge of hostage affairs. Is U.S. also involved in negotiations with the Hamas? And frankly, have negotiations been opened up to release them as well?
Well, both the United States and Israel have a stated policy of not negotiating with terrorists. Hamas are terrorists. There is absolutely no other way to describe them unless you want to describe them as genocidal maniacs and people who massacre babies. And so I don't believe the United States is directly involved in negotiating with Hamas for the return of those hostages. There are reports that other actors, perhaps Egypt, perhaps Turkey or others, might become involved in any kind of negotiation. But it's actually too soon to say whether that will certainly bear fruit. I can tell you that in the past, when there have been incidents like this, there was one in particular in the early 2000s, an Israeli soldier named Gilad Shalit, who was taken hostage by Hamas. Ultimately, Israel agreed to free almost 2,000 Palestinian terrorists who were being held in its prisons, convicted terrorists who had blood on their hands. I think that would be unthinkable in this situation. If that's the equation, about 2,000 to 1, we'd be talking about more than 200,000 people. That is obviously not going to happen. And so some other arrangement will have to come about. We certainly hope that they will be returned home safely.
Avi, what's the status on the ground invasion of the Gaza Strip? This ultimatum to people in Gaza to evacuate, leave as soon as possible. Is it a build-up to that? Are the Israeli forces already, have they been given the go-ahead to move in?
As far as we know, no such instruction has been given. It is certainly true that Israel has mobilized an unprecedented number of reserve troops, over 300,000, who are at the ready for any possibility. And as you said, the warning has been given to residents of certain areas of the Gaza Strip to evacuate those areas. There were earlier reports that they were being given 24 hours. Those have been contradicted by Israeli officials who say, we understand it's going to take time, and so we're going to give that time for civilians to vacate those areas. But I think it's important to realize that Hamas has a cruel and cynical tactic of embedding itself in the civilian population. It's no coincidence that civilians have to evacuate, because that's where Hamas is. Hamas has made a practice of locating itself in schools and mosques and hospitals. This is documented in every single respect. And so it's engaging in not only a war crime, but a double war crime. On the one hand, murdering Israeli civilians, but also hiding behind Palestinian civilians and trying to draw Israeli firepower against them. It is absolutely abhorrent, absolutely despicable, and the world must stand with Israel as it engages with this horrific organization that is marked by evil.
Right. We'd also like to ask you about the international support that Israel is getting right now. The U.S. has committed military supplies, ammunition. What is the kind of support? Would you be able to detail for our viewers the kind of support the U.S. is giving Israel directly, apart from the diplomatic support, of course? Is there any kind of support coming in from other nations? Has any kind of assistance or any kind of message been sent to India as well?
Well, I think that there has been an outpouring of support for Israel in the aftermath of Saturday's massacre. I think there have been messages of support coming in from around the world. You've had numerous world leaders and senior officials landing in Israel to express their solidarity, express their support. But of course, the U.S.-Israel relationship is one of the most important bilateral relationships that Israel has, and also for the United States. And that has expressed itself in recent days, not only by the visits by the U.S. Secretary of State and the U.S. Secretary of Defense, and of course, multiple remarks by the President of the United States expressing revulsion and disgust at what transpired on Saturday by Hamas. But as we know, there has been a mobilization of at least one carrier group. We understand there may be a second one on its way. As your previous guest mentioned, Israel's doctrine is that it defends itself by itself. And so it doesn't call on other countries to come to its defense. At the same time, should Israel find itself in greater peril, for example, if Hezbollah in Israel's north decides to open a second front, which would be a very dangerous development indeed, it is possible that the United States or other countries might be called upon to participate in Israel's defense.
Right. Our full solidarity with the people of Israel who've lost their loved ones in this terrible terror attack. But Avi, my final question, and if you could briefly tell us what, according to you, went wrong. Israel is a country. The people of Israel, the forces are always on alert. The security systems, the intelligence systems are famed worldwide. What do you think went wrong in the system that allowed such an attack to happen?
Well, there'll certainly be an inquiry about that afterwards. I'm sure that once the dust settles and things return to some degree of normalcy, there will be a commission of inquiry to ask those exact questions and reach answers about the dramatic military and intelligence failures that led to Saturday. But I will say that I think there's been a misunderstanding of what Hamas is. I think for many years, people understood that Hamas was a terrorist organization that had these heinous goals, but they viewed it as somewhat rational or pragmatic, an organization that you could do business with, that all it really wanted was the welfare of its people. And what we saw on Saturday was an organization that is hell-bent on the murder of as many Jews as it can possibly kill. And that is what we're dealing with today. That is the organization that we're contending with, and that has changed the equation dramatically. And I think that's what we need to understand, that's what the world needs to understand, and that's why we need the international support to ensure that we are able to do whatever we can to eradicate this evil from the earth.
All right, Avi Maya, thank you very much for joining us at this time of crisis for the people of Israel, and hope your loved ones, your colleagues remain safe, and hopefully there is closure for some of them as well. Thank you once again for being with us here on Global Eye on CNBC TV 18. With that, it's a wrap on this special broadcast. Thank you for watching and stay tuned.